house smelled of dust and faded flowers, a mixture of time and memory that clung to the air in every corner. Eleanor stood in the doorway, keys still warm in her palm, and felt the silence wrap around her like an old familiar blanket. This place, with its creaking floorboards and walls that had witnessed decades of whispered conversations, had been her sanctuary long before it became her burden. "I should have visited more," she whispered to no one, her voice barely disturbing the stillness. The afternoon light filtered through lace curtains her grandmother had hung 30 years before, casting dappled shadows across the worn Persian rug in the entryway. Eleanor, 58, with silver strands now outnumbering the brown in her hair, stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The sound echoed through the empty rooms like a final punctuation mark. The end of one chapter, the reluctant beginning of another. 2 weeks had passed since she'd buried William, her 82-year-old grandfather, beneath the oak tree at Oakwood Cemetery. 2 weeks since she'd watched that simple wooden casket disappear into the earth while standing alone, save for Mrs. Henderson from next door and Mr. Collins, who'd worked with William at the hardware store before it closed in '97. Not a single relative had bothered to come. Eleanor moved through the living room, running her fingers over the old Zenith record player, the spines of books that had been read so many times their titles had faded, the armchair where her grandfather had sat every evening, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a cup of Earl Grey going cold on the side table. "They called you a nobody," she said to the empty chair, "a stubborn old man who'd wasted his life." The bitter words her cousin Patricia had spoken at the reading of the will still stung. The casual dismissal from her Uncle Robert that William had never amounted to much. The family had drifted away years ago, claiming William was difficult, outdated, unwilling to change with the times. None of them had come to sit by his bed during those final days when breathing had become a battle he fought with quiet dignity. None of them had held his hand in the evenings when fear crept into his normally steady gaze. But Eleanor had been there. From childhood, she had been the only one who seemed to understand him, to appreciate his quiet ways, his thoughtful silences, the stories he told that hinted at a life far more complex than anyone imagined. "When you listen closely enough," he once told her as she sat on his knee at age 7, "you can hear the world telling its secrets. Most people are too busy talking to notice." She'd carried those words with her through life, through a failed marriage that had left her with little more than scars and self-doubt, through 20 years of teaching history to disinterested high schoolers, through the quiet loneliness that had become her constant companion. Now, standing in his house with the weight of memories pressing down on her shoulders, she felt a strange mix of grief and purpose. The family wanted her to empty the place quickly, to sell what could be sold, to leave the past behind as efficiently as possible. "Eleanor," Patricia had said on the phone just yesterday, "don't be sentimental about this. You know your financial situation. The sooner we liquidate, the better for everyone." Everyone. As if anyone but Eleanor had cared. Friends, if you're enjoying this story, I'd love to hear where you're listening from today. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy stories that touch the heart. Now, let's continue with Eleanor's journey. That first evening, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and William's old pocket watch ticking beside her. Tomorrow she would begin the task of sorting through 70 years of accumulated life, deciding what to keep, what to discard, what stories to preserve, and which to let fade away. Outside the window, the sky darkened to purple, then to black. The small town of Oakwood, Pennsylvania fell quiet, street lamps casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. In this forgotten corner of America, time moved more slowly, memories lingered longer, and secrets had room to breathe. Eleanor slept that night in her childhood bedroom, beneath the same quilt her grandmother had made, surrounded by the same wallpaper with its pattern of tiny blue flowers. She dreamed of William as he had been decades ago, tall and straight-backed, his hands strong and sure, as he showed her how to fix the chain on her bicycle, how to identify constellations in the night sky, how to stand firm when the world tried to push her down. Morning came with birdsong and the distant sound of Mrs. Henderson's wind chimes. Eleanor rose, made coffee in the old percolator, and began her task with William's study, the heart of the house, the place where he had spent most of his time in later years. The desk was solid oak, its surface marked with rings from coffee cups and scratches from decades of use. Eleanor opened each drawer methodically, sorting papers, old bills, photographs curled at the edges. In the bottom drawer, she found a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with William's precise handwriting. She sat in his chair and began to read, feeling like an intruder, yet unable to resist. March 15, 1965. Met with Jenkins today about the new design. He thinks it could revolutionize the industry if we can solve the cooling issue. Reynolds still skeptical but coming around. The prototype runs beautifully, like nothing I've ever ridden before. Eleanor frowned, turning pages. More entries followed, technical notes about engines, sketches of what looked like motorcycle parts, references to races and rallies, names she didn't recognize. This wasn't the grandfather she knew, the quiet man who'd run the hardware store, who'd lived simply and without fanfare. These were the words of someone passionate, engaged with the world in ways she'd never imagined. She continued searching the desk and found a locked drawer in the back. It refused to open, and no key was immediately visible. Eleanor sat back, puzzled, then remembered something William had told her once. The best place to hide something important is inside something else important. Her eyes drifted to the bookshelf where a well-worn copy of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea sat, William's favorite book. He'd read it every year on his birthday, a tradition he never broke. Eleanor reached for it, feeling its familiar weight, and as she opened the cover, a small brass key fell into her palm. Her heart quickened. The key fit perfectly into the desk drawer's lock. Inside lay a small stack of photographs, yellowed with age. Eleanor gasped as she lifted the first one. A young William, perhaps 30, standing proudly beside a gleaming motorcycle, his arm around a dark-haired woman Eleanor recognized as her grandmother in her youth. Both were smiling, William's face alight with a joy she'd rarely seen. More photos followed. William at what appeared to be racetracks, surrounded by men in leather jackets. Motorcycles lined up behind them. William shaking hands with someone important-looking, receiving a trophy. William bent over an engine, tools in hand, completely absorbed in his work. Beneath the photos lay envelopes containing letters from companies with names like Triumph, BSA, and Norton. Technical drawings with William's name in the corner. Articles cut from magazines with headlines like Revolutionary Design by Unknown American Engineer and William Harrington's Custom Build Takes First at Daytona. Who were you? Eleanor whispered, the grandfather she thought she'd known dissolving before her eyes, replaced by a stranger whose life contained depths she'd never suspected. As she sat surrounded by these fragments of an unknown past, the phone rang, startling her. Patricia's crisp voice cut through the line. Eleanor, I've taken the liberty of sending over a real estate agent tomorrow at 10. Good company, very efficient. They'll help us get top dollar for the house. Eleanor's grip tightened on the receiver. I'm still going through his things, Patricia. It's too soon. It's been 2 weeks, Patricia interrupted. The market's good right now. We need to move quickly. We? Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks. You didn't even come to his funeral. A pause. That's not fair. I had commitments. He raised you after your parents died, Eleanor said quietly. He put you through college. And I'm grateful, Patricia replied, her tone suggesting anything but. Look, the agent's name is David. Just let him look around. No commitment. After hanging up, Eleanor sat motionless, fury and grief battling within her. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Time was running out. Tomorrow strangers would come to assess the value of William's life, to put a price tag on his memories. Her eyes drifted toward the kitchen door that led to the backyard where the old garage stood, a place that had always been off limits when she was a child. William had kept it locked, had always redirected her curiosity when she asked what was inside. "Some places are just for remembering, Ellie," he'd say. "Sometimes the past is best left undisturbed." But now the past was all she had left of him. And somewhere in that garage might be more pieces of the puzzle that was William Harrington, the man the world had dismissed, the man whose depths she was only beginning to discover. With a deep breath, Eleanor stood. The real estate agent would arrive tomorrow, and with him, the beginning of the end for this house and everything in it. Tonight might be her only chance to uncover the truth William had kept hidden for so long. She gathered the photos, the letters, and the journal, hugging them to her chest as if they might disappear if she let go. Then, with determination growing with each step, she walked toward the back door, toward the garage that had stood silent and locked for as long as she could remember. Outside, twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and violet. The garage, a weathered structure of gray wood and corrugated metal, looked almost otherworldly in the fading light. Eleanor approached slowly, feeling like a trespasser despite now owning this property. The padlock on the door was old but sturdy, its metal surface rough with rust. She tried the brass key from the book, but it didn't fit. Of course not. It would be too simple. William had guarded this place carefully. He wouldn't make access easy, even for her, especially for her. Eleanor stood there, key in hand, as darkness gathered around her. Tomorrow, strangers would come with clipboards and calculators to assess the value of William's life. Tonight, she needed to find the truth he had hidden away. "What were you protecting, Grandpa?" she whispered to the gathering shadows. "And why didn't you trust me with it?" The silence offered no answer, but somewhere deep inside, Eleanor felt a strange certainty growing. Whatever lay behind that locked door had the power to change everything she thought she knew about the man who had shaped her life. Eleanor returned to the house, her mind racing. If the key to understanding William lay in that locked garage, she needed to find the key that would open it, literally and figuratively. Back in his study, she began a more thorough search, checking behind picture frames, beneath the desk blotter, inside old cigar boxes that had held his paper clips and rubber bands. In the bedroom, she ran her hands along the undersides of drawers, checked inside shoes at the back of the closet, felt along the edges of the mirror above his dresser. Nothing. William had been meticulous, but not obvious. The hiding place would mean something. It would be personal. Near midnight, exhausted and frustrated, Eleanor sank into William's armchair in the living room. The house creaked and settled around her, as if breathing in the cool night air. Her eyes drifted to the record player, an old Zenith that William had treasured. How many evenings had she spent here as a child, watching him carefully select an album, place it on the turntable, and lower the needle with reverent precision. "Music speaks when words fail us," he'd told her once. "Some emotions are too big for language." On impulse, Eleanor rose and lifted the lid of the record player. Inside sat William's collection, mostly jazz, some classical, a few folk albums from the 60s. She ran her fingers over the cardboard sleeves, remembering how he would close his eyes when listening to Dave Brubeck or Miles Davis, his face softening in a way it rarely did otherwise. One album caught her eye. "Kind of Blue" by Miles Davis, William's favorite. She pulled it out and opened the sleeve. There, nestled against the black vinyl, lay a small silver key. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took it. It looked old, the metal worn smooth in places, as if it had been handled often over the years. She held it to her heart for a moment, then made her way back outside, a flashlight borrowed from the kitchen drawer lighting her path. The night had grown chilly, the air sharp with the scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Eleanor's breath formed small clouds as she approached the garage once more. The key slid into the padlock smoothly, and with a click that seemed to echo in the darkness, the lock opened. Eleanor hesitated, suddenly afraid. What if she was violating William's last wishes? What if he'd kept this place locked for good reason? But the real estate agent would be here tomorrow, and with him would come the dismantling of William's legacy. She had to know the truth. With a deep breath, she pulled the door open. The hinges protested with a long, low groan, as if giving voice to secrets kept too long. Eleanor shone her flashlight inside, revealing a space that smelled of oil, metal, and dust, the perfume of patient waiting. At first, she saw only shapes, workbenches along the walls, tools hanging from pegboards, cabinets with glass fronts reflecting her flashlight's beam. But as she stepped further inside, the light fell upon two large objects in the center of the garage, covered with heavy canvas tarps, their shapes suggesting something significant beneath. Eleanor approached slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She reached for the edge of the first tarp, hesitated, then pulled. The heavy fabric resisted, then slid away with a whisper of dust and displacement. What stood revealed stole her breath away. A motorcycle, but not just any motorcycle. Even to Eleanor's untrained eye, this was something special, something rare. Its lines were elegant, its chrome dulled by years, but still hinting at former glory. The leather seat had cracked with age, the tires flat against the concrete floor, but the machine itself stood proud, like a thoroughbred waiting to run again. A small plaque on the gas tank read, Bruce Superior SO 100, 1939. Eleanor circled it slowly, running her fingers over the cool metal surface, feeling the history beneath her touch. She knew nothing about motorcycles, but she recognized craftsmanship, artistry, passion. This was no ordinary vehicle. This was a masterpiece. She moved to the second tarp, pulling it away with more confidence now. Another motorcycle appeared, different from the first but equally commanding in its presence. Sleeker, darker, with a sense of coiled power, even in stillness. Vincent Black Lightning, 1951, read the badge on its side. "Oh, Grandpa," Eleanor whispered, "what were you hiding?" Against the far wall stood a metal filing cabinet. Eleanor opened its drawers to find folders meticulously labeled. Maintenance records, ownership papers, insurance documents, all organized with William's characteristic precision. Photographs, too. William astride these very machines, younger, vibrant, his face alight with a joy she had rarely witnessed. One folder contained newspaper clippings. Local engineers' custom design takes second at Isle of Man TT. Harrington Innovation challenges British dominance. American Dark Horse impresses at Daytona. Another held letters from manufacturers, discussing designs, offering contracts, speaking of William in terms of respect and admiration. This was a man who had been recognized, valued, celebrated in a world Eleanor had known nothing about. As she pieced together the story through these fragments, a new image of William emerged. Not the quiet, reserved man who had raised her, but a brilliant engineer, a skilled rider, a respected innovator who had moved in circles far beyond the boundaries of Oakwood. Then, in the glove compartment of the Vincent, she found an envelope, not yellowed like the others, but newer, the paper still crisp. Her name was written on the front in William's unmistakable hand. Eleanor sat on a nearby stool, her legs suddenly weak. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you found what I've kept hidden for so long. These machines aren't just motorcycles. They're the chapters of my life I chose to keep private, not out of shame, but out of protection. The Bras Superior was my first love. I saved every penny from 3 years of working double shifts to buy her in '59. She was already 20 years old then, but beautiful beyond words. The Vincent came later, after I'd made a name for myself designing cooling systems. Only 31 were ever made, a miracle of engineering. I could have sold them decades ago when your grandmother fell ill and the medical bills mounted. Patricia and Robert urged me to Get rid of that junk in the garage. They never knew what was actually here. But these weren't just possessions to me. They were my history, my accomplishments, my pride. I kept them secret because the world grew increasingly eager to take from those who have and give nothing in return. Your cousins would have sold them in an instant had they known their value. But you always saw me, Eleanor. Not what I had, not what I could provide, but me. These machines are worth a small fortune now. The Vincent alone would fetch over $1 million at auction to the right collector. But their true value isn't in money. It's in the story they tell of a life fully lived, of passion pursued without apology, of dreams that weren't abandoned even when they had to be hidden away. Do with them what you will. Sell them if you must. But know this, a man's worth isn't measured by what the world sees, but by what he builds in silence, what he loves without condition, and what he chooses to protect from those who would never understand its true value. All my love. William. Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The garage seemed to expand around her, filled not just with machines and tools, but with the presence of William himself. Not the grandfather she had known, but the man he had been beneath the surface, the man the world had never truly seen. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. The house stood silent, waiting, and Eleanor sat surrounded by a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined, left by a man the world had dismissed as ordinary, as forgettable, as nothing special. They had been so wrong. I wonder if you've ever discovered something that changed how you saw someone you thought you knew. Maybe a letter, a photograph, or a story that revealed a whole new side to them? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if this story is touching your heart, please consider subscribing to hear more like it. Now, let's return to Eleanor as she faces a crucial decision. Eleanor remained in the garage until the small hours of the morning, going through every folder, examining every photograph, reading every letter. The more she discovered, the more clearly she saw the man William had been. Brilliant, innovative, respected in circles her family had never known existed. He had designed cooling systems that revolutionized motorcycle engineering in the 1960s, had raced alongside legends, had been offered positions at prestigious companies that he'd turned down to stay in Oakwood and care for his family after his wife's early death. He had chosen obscurity not because he couldn't achieve greatness, but because he valued something more. The quiet dignity of a life lived on his own terms. The freedom to pursue his passions without the burden of public expectation. The peace that comes from being underestimated rather than constantly judged. When dawn began to lighten the sky, Eleanor carefully replaced the tarps over the motorcycles, locked the garage, and returned to the house. She showered, changed clothes, and made a pot of strong coffee. The real estate agent would arrive in less than 3 hours. Patricia had already texted twice, asking if everything was ready for him. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, William's letter before her, and made the hardest phone call of her life. Patricia, it's Eleanor. I've decided not to sell the house. The explosion on the other end was immediate and predictable. Patricia's voice rose to a pitch Eleanor had last heard when they were teenagers fighting over borrowed clothes. You can't do that. We all agreed. You all agreed, Eleanor corrected quietly. I never did. This is about money, Eleanor. Your share alone would set you up comfortably. Don't be stupid. Eleanor looked out the window at the garage, solid and weathered in the morning light. It's not about money, Patricia. It's about respect. Respect? For what? An old house that needs a new roof and probably has asbestos in the walls? For junk that should have been thrown away years ago? For William, Eleanor said. For what he built. For who he was. Patricia's laugh was sharp. He was a stubborn old man who ran a hardware store and died with barely enough money to bury himself. Let's not romanticize him just because he's gone. The words stung, but Eleanor held firm. Cancel the real estate agent, Patricia. I'm staying. The house is mine according to the will, and I'm keeping it. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in silence, her heart pounding, but her resolve steady. The decision felt right in a way few choices in her life ever had. She would stay, she would honor William's legacy, and somehow she would find a way to tell his story. The doorbell rang precisely at 10 o'clock. Eleanor opened it to find not just the real estate agent, a balding man in his 40s with an eager smile, but Patricia and Robert as well, both dressed as if for battle in expensive clothes and expressions of determined authority. Eleanor, Patricia said, stepping forward without waiting to be invited in, this is David Miller from Century 21, and we need to talk. Eleanor stood her ground in the doorway. There's nothing to discuss. I've made my decision. Robert moved to stand beside Patricia, his tall frame imposing. Be reasonable, Eleanor. This place is falling apart. The property taxes alone will eat up your savings in no time. You can't afford sentimentality. Why don't we all sit down and discuss options? The real estate agent suggested, clearly sensing the tension. There are many ways to approach this situation. Eleanor looked at these people, her family by blood but strangers in every way that mattered, and felt a strange calm settle over her. William had faced this same dismissal, this same condescension, for decades. He had endured it with quiet dignity, never revealing the truth about who he was or what he had accomplished. But Eleanor was not William, and perhaps it was time for the truth to see daylight. Before we discuss anything, she said, there's something you should see. She led them through the house and out the back door, feeling their impatience like a physical presence at her back. The garage stood waiting, morning sunlight glinting off its small dusty window. Eleanor unlocked the padlock and pulled the door open. Grandpa's junk, Patricia said with a dismissive wave. We know he kept old tools and... She fell silent as Eleanor pulled away the first tarp, revealing the Bro Superior in all its tarnished glory. Even covered in decades of dust, the motorcycle commanded attention, its presence filling the small space with undeniable significance. What? What is that? Robert asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. This, Eleanor said, running her hand along the chrome handlebars, is a 1939 Bro Superior SS100. Only 196 were ever made. They're called the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. T. Lawrence of Arabia, died riding one. She pulled away the second tarp. And this is a 1951 Vincent Black Lightning, one of 31 ever produced, the fastest motorcycle of its era. The real estate agent had gone very still, his professional demeanor cracking as he stared at the machines. Those are extremely valuable. Extremely. How valuable? Patricia demanded, her eyes narrowing. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. The Vincent would sell for over $1 million at auction. The Bra, perhaps half that. The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia's face had gone pale. Robert's red. The real estate agent looked as if he might faint. That's not possible, Robert finally managed. Where would he get? William designed the cooling system used in Triumph motorcycles throughout the 1960s, Eleanor said, opening one of the folders from the filing cabinet. He held patents. He raced. He was respected and admired by people who understood what these machines truly represented. She laid out the photographs, the letters, the newspaper clippings, evidence of a life her family had never bothered to discover. All these years, she continued, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat, you thought he was nothing, just a small-town nobody who never amounted to anything. But he was brilliant. He was passionate. He just chose to keep that part of himself private, to protect it from people who would never appreciate its true value. Patricia moved forward, reaching toward one of the motorcycles. We need to call an auction house immediately. If what you're saying is true, don't touch it. Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. These aren't yours to sell. They belong to the estate, Robert argued. We all inherit equally. Eleanor shook her head. Read the will again. The house and its contents were left specifically to me. These motorcycles are staying right here. That's insane, Patricia snapped. You'd leave millions of dollars sitting in a garage just to spite us? Not spite, Eleanor corrected. Honor. William kept these bikes his entire life, through financial hardship, through illness, through all the times you pushed him to get rid of the junk and be practical. He protected them because they mattered to him. I intend to do the same. The argument that followed was heated, with threats of lawyers and contests to the will. The real estate agent retreated to his car, clearly wanting no part in the family drama unfolding before him. Eventually, Patricia and Robert left too, slamming their car doors and speeding away in a spray of gravel, promises of legal action hanging in the air behind them. Eleanor stood in the driveway watching them go, feeling lighter than she had in years. The truth was out now, messy and uncomfortable, but real. William's legacy was no longer hidden in shadows. Back in the garage, she pulled an old wooden stool up beside the Broche Superior and sat down, placing her hand on its weathered leather seat. "They finally saw you," she whispered, as if William might hear her. "They may not understand, but they saw." Outside, the small town of Oakwood continued its quiet afternoon rhythm. Children riding bikes down sidewalks, elderly neighbors tending flower gardens, the distant whistle of the 3:15 train passing through on its way to somewhere else. Life went on, unchanged in most ways. But inside this garage, a transformation had begun, not just of motorcycles waiting to be restored to their former glory, but of a story waiting to be told, a legacy waiting to be honored, a life waiting to be fully recognized at last. Eleanor knew the battle wasn't over. There would be lawyers and arguments and difficult days ahead. But sitting here surrounded by evidence of William's passion and skill, she felt a certainty she had rarely experienced. This was where she belonged. This was what mattered. Some treasures aren't measured in dollars. Some legacies can't be divided by percentages in a will. Some truths are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. William had understood that. Now Eleanor did too. 6 months passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Some slowly, savored for their beauty. Others quickly, hurried through for the pain they contained. The legal battle with Patricia and Robert had been brutal but brief. William's will was ironclad, his intentions clear. Eleanor had inherited the house and everything in it, including 2 motorcycles whose value had left even the attorneys speechless when the appraisals came in. Winter had blanketed Oakwood in snow, then yielded to a spring that seemed determined to bring renewal whether Eleanor was ready or not. Crocuses pushed through soil in the front yard, where William had planted them decades ago. The old apple tree behind the garage burst into pink-white blossoms that drifted like snow in April breezes. And Eleanor, who had spent her life teaching other people's children about history, began to write a different kind of history, one that had nearly been lost. She started with research, spending hours at the local library poring over old newspapers, tracking down motorcycle enthusiasts through online forums, finding men in their 70s and 80s who remembered William Harrington and his innovative designs. "He was ahead of his time," one old racer told her over the phone, his voice cracking with age and emotion. "The cooling system he designed for the Triumph, nothing like it had been seen before. Could have made millions if he'd pushed harder, marketed himself better." "Why didn't he?" Eleanor had asked. A long pause. "Some men build things because they want recognition. Others build things because they can't not build them. Your grandfather was the second kind. I'm curious, have you ever discovered a hidden talent or passion in someone close to you? Something they kept quiet about? It's amazing how people we think we know can surprise us. Share your experience in the comments, and if you're enjoying Eleanor's journey, please subscribe for more stories that remind us it's never too late for new beginnings. Now let's see what spring has brought to Eleanor. On a warm May afternoon, Eleanor sat in the garage, no longer dusty and forgotten, but clean, organized, alive with purpose. The concrete floor had been swept, the workbenches cleared and arranged with tools both old and new. The windows washed for perhaps the first time in decades, allowed sunlight to stream in, illuminating the two motorcycles that now stood uncovered in the center of the space. The Bruce Superior gleamed with new polish, its chrome no longer dull but brilliant in the afternoon light. Eleanor had been working on it for months, guided by a restoration expert named Jim Carson, who had nearly fallen over when she'd first shown him what lay in her grandfather's garage. "Lady," he'd said, removing his cap to run a hand through thinning gray hair, "do you have any idea what you got here?" She had smiled. "I'm beginning to." Now Jim stood beside her, both of them admiring their handiwork. At 72, with arthritic hands and a lifetime of motorcycle knowledge, he had become not just a teacher, but a friend, spending 3 afternoons a week helping Eleanor bring William's treasures back to life. "She's coming along beautifully," Jim said, nodding toward the bro. "Another month, maybe 2, and we could have her running again." Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went bone deep. He would have loved to see this. "He's seeing it," Jim replied simply, and though Eleanor had never been one for spiritual notions, she found herself agreeing. The Vincent Black Lightning stood beside its British counterpart, still awaiting its turn for restoration. But even in its aged state, it commanded respect, its lines suggesting speed and power held momentarily in check. On the wall behind them hung framed photographs and news clippings. William in his racing days, William receiving awards for his designs, William standing proudly beside these very machines when they were new and he was young. A visual history that told the story of a man who had lived with passion and purpose, whose accomplishments had nearly been forgotten. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about what happens next." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Selling after all? Can't say I'd blame you. That kind of money would set you up for life." Eleanor shook her head. "No, not selling, sharing." She outlined her plan to turn the garage and part of the house into a small museum dedicated to American motorcycle design and innovation, with William's story and machines at its heart. To create a scholarship for engineering students with a focus on sustainable transportation. To write a book documenting not just William's contributions, but those of other overlooked innovators whose work had shaped an industry. "Ambitious," Jim commented when she finished. "Expensive, too." "I've found some potential grants," Eleanor replied, "and I've sold my condo in the city. It's enough to get started." Jim studied her face for a long moment. "You're really doing this, aren't you? Changing your whole life for his legacy." Eleanor looked around the garage, at the motorcycles, the photographs, the tools that had shaped metal and dreams. "Not just for his legacy," she said softly, "for mine too." The following weeks brought changes both practical and profound. Eleanor officially retired from teaching, focusing her energies entirely on the restoration and the museum plans. She connected with motorcycle clubs and vintage vehicle associations, arranging for experts to view the bikes and document their historical significance. Word spread through the small but passionate community of motorcycle historians and collectors. Emails arrived from as far away as Japan and Australia, asking questions, offering information, expressing interest in visiting once the museum opened. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, "Hidden Treasures, Oakwood Man's Secret Legacy Revealed." The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, had sat for hours listening to Eleanor recount William's story, her eyes wide with wonder. "Why do you think he kept it all secret?" she had asked. "Why not tell people who he really was?" Eleanor had considered this question many times over the past months. "I think," she said finally, "that he understood something most of us never learn, that true value doesn't come from other people's recognition. It comes from doing what matters to you, whether anyone notices or not." One rainy afternoon in June, Eleanor sat at William's desk, now her desk, reviewing architectural plans for converting part of the house into exhibition space. The doorbell rang, unexpected and startling in the quiet. She opened the front door to find Patricia standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable and out of place. 6 months had passed since their last bitter exchange of legal correspondence. Patricia looked older somehow, the lines around her mouth deeper, her shoulders slightly stooped. "Can I come in?" she asked, her usual assertiveness muted. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her cousin into the house. They sat awkwardly in the living room, the same room where they had played as children, where they had opened Christmas presents, where they had eventually grown into strangers who shared DNA but little else. "I saw the article," Patricia said finally, nodding toward a copy of the newspaper on the coffee table. About, about what you're doing with grandfather's things?" Eleanor waited, expecting criticism, preparing her defenses. "I didn't know," Patricia continued, her voice uncharacteristically subdued, "about his designs, his racing, the patents. None of it." "He never talked about it," Eleanor acknowledged. "But you found out." Patricia's tone held an accusation, but also something else. Regret, perhaps. "You saw something in him that the rest of us missed." Eleanor thought carefully before responding. "I didn't know either, Patricia. Not until after he was gone. The difference is, I wanted to know. I was willing to look." Patricia flinched slightly, then nodded. "I deserved that." Silence stretched between them, filled with decades of misunderstandings and missed opportunities. "I brought something," Patricia said suddenly, reaching into her purse. She withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it on the coffee table. "It was grandmother's. Mother gave it to me years ago. I think it belongs here now." Eleanor opened the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A man's wedding ring, simple gold, inscribed inside with initials and a date. William's ring, which he had removed only when working with machinery that might catch it. "Thank you," Eleanor said, closing her fingers around it. Patricia rose to leave, pausing at the door. "The museum, it's a good idea. He deserves to be remembered properly." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was an acknowledgement of William's worth, of Eleanor's vision, of truths too long ignored. It was, perhaps, a beginning. After Patricia left, Eleanor returned to the garage, William's ring warm in her pocket. She approached the brow superior, its restoration nearly complete, and ran her hand along its gleaming gas tank. "We're getting there," she told it quietly. "People are starting to see." She moved to the Vincent Black Lightning, still waiting patiently for its turn. As she checked the frame for rust spots, her hand brushed against something wedged deep in the seat padding, a small, hard object that shouldn't have been there. Carefully, she worked it free. A small metal box, tarnished with age, its lid secured with a simple clasp. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, and beneath it, a set of technical drawings unlike any she had seen in William's papers before. The note was brief, written in William's precise hand. "For Eleanor, who always saw beyond the surface. My final design. Never patented, never shared. A cooling system that could reduce motorcycle engine emissions by 60% while improving performance. I completed it in 2010, but kept it to myself, knowing the industry wasn't ready, knowing the right person would need to champion it. That person is you, my dear. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you understand what matters. Not profit or recognition, but making something that lasts, something that makes a difference. The world needs fewer consumers and more creators, fewer critics and more builders. This design is my legacy to you. Do with it what you will, but do it with passion and purpose." "With all my love," William Eleanor stared at the drawings, her vision blurring with tears. Even in death, William was still teaching her, still offering gifts she had never expected to receive. This wasn't just a technical innovation. It was a torch being passed, a challenge being issued, a door being opened. The museum would no longer be just about preserving the past. It would be about building the future. A future William had envisioned but would never see. A future Eleanor now had the power to help create. Outside the garage, rain fell softly on Oakwood, washing the world clean, preparing it for new growth. Inside, Eleanor carefully refolded the drawings and held them to her heart, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose in equal measure. Some treasures are found in dusty garages, hidden under tarps, forgotten by time. Others are found within ourselves when we finally have the courage to look beyond what the world tells us we are, to discover what we might become. Eleanor had found both, and in doing so, she had transformed not just William's legacy, but her own. Dear friends, as we come to the end of Eleanor and William's story, I want to thank you for taking this journey with us. The treasures we discover in life aren't always what we expect, but they're often exactly what we need. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might appreciate a reminder that it's never too late to discover something wonderful in others or in ourselves. Until next time, this is Evelyn Parker, wishing you unexpected treasures of your own.